talking to Zhang while hiding a knife behind his back, while two other guys stepped in and offered to go with him as well. But Zhang reached into his pocket right away because he realized these guys were up to no good. He drew his gun and blew the beanie guy's brains out in the blink of an eye. He then started yelling at the rest of the residents, telling them that if they thought he actually bought their BS, they were crazy. One of them tried to calm him down, asking him what the heck he was doing and telling him to wait. But Zhang didn't even let him finish his sentence before opening fire with pinpoint accuracy, one round after another. We see him landing lethal shots on most of the group, taking them down. Even though a few of them managed to escape through the window, Zhang had already sent a clear message to everyone. Shortly after, the madly in love girl came over to check on our hero. But he told her he was fine, just got a scratch, and that nothing had happened. He walked off, saying out loud that he was too nice for his own good because he decided to spare the rest of the residents after they'd treated him so poorly. But it seemed like Chi didn't like what he was saying, thinking to herself that everyone knew full well he only took those guys out to make an example of them. On the other end, Zhang was busy thinking about what to do in the future, knowing he couldn't rely on the building's weak little wannabe tough guys. When Zhang got back to his place, he started asking Zhou about the latest developments in the building while he was away. She replied that Lin had lost it over the death of her grandson, killed the boy's mother, and even tried to kill Zhou, but some residents stepped in and took Lin down. She added that a woman named Lin Ju from Building 9 wanted to talk to him, but didn't go into the details of their cooperation, saying she'd only discuss it with Zhang in person. Zhang was caught off guard and asked why a woman like Lin Ju would want to talk to him, especially since he already had everything he needed. Zhou replied that Lin Ju had been one of her patients before, and that they didn't talk much, but all she knew was that the woman had asked to speak with Zhang by name. Zhang asked Zhou to tell him Lin Ju's background and every detail she knew about her. Zhou explained that this woman was around 40 years old and had owned a massive cosmetics company before the apocalypse. On top of that, she was currently in total control of Building 9, where only 10 people had died so far. Zhang was impressed when he heard this and said that for a woman to be able to control an entire building in an era where the strong prey on the weak meant she was a genuinely fascinating person. When Zhou saw he was intrigued, she asked him if he was planning on teaming up with this woman. He told her he would first see what she had to offer in return. After that, Zhang checked his phone, saying he was going to reach out to her because he wanted to know what the other buildings in their area were thinking. That's when he saw two friend requests, one from Lin Ju and the other from the chief financial officer of all the warehouses in southern China, whom our hero had only met once. The moment Zhang accepted the requests, he received his first message from Lin Ju, introducing herself and saying she wanted to talk. Zhang was surprised because she had been sitting right by her phone, waiting for him to accept the request. He just told her to get straight to the point. She replied that it was too much information to type in a text and that it would be better to discuss it over a phone call. But Zhang told her he didn't have any time to waste and that she'd better wrap it up before he hung up and left. Lin Ju started to get annoyed by his tone, but told herself she had to put up with him. She'd heard all about how he had taken out about half the residents in his own building, Building 25, and that he had a sniper rifle and an electric snowmobile that were absolutely unbeatable. Shaking off her frustration, she told him she'd heard the rumors and knew he had the snowmobile, and that she wanted to team up. Zhang replied very coldly, asking what she was actually bringing to the table for this partnership. She explained that Building 9 was completely under her control, and that she could make all 76 people under her command follow Zhang's orders. This way, he wouldn't even need to go out and look for resources himself. They could take his snowmobile and bring the supplies straight to him. But of course, in return, he had to supply them with food and drinks on a regular basis. Zhang thought to himself, does she think I'm stupid? From his perspective, they were asking for his snowmobile and getting food and drinks handed to them as a bonus. But Lin Ju didn't back down. She kept the pressure on, warning him to be very careful because he was currently a target for thousands of people in the neighborhood. She pointed out that the only reason they hadn't attacked him yet was because they were doing the risk-to-reward calculations. Because of this, she argued that his best move was to partner up with Building 9 and promised she wouldn't make a move against him. Zhang didn't like the tone of her voice and asked if she was threatening him or if she planned to attack if he turned down the deal. She replied that she was sure he wouldn't turn her down since he didn't need any extra enemies. Even if he could take them on, he wouldn't be able to wipe all of them out. Zhang let out a laugh and told her it was the first time he'd seen someone beg with so much nerve. Still, he told her he would think about the offer and get back to her later. After hanging up, he started to get a little anxious, wondering if the entire neighborhood might actually team up against him and launch a massive assault. Even though he wasn't worried about fighting them off one group at a time, he knew that if they all joined forces, they might try to blow up or demolish the entire building all at once. But then he remembered that tearing down a building was next to impossible. The heavy machinery needed for that required a ton of fuel, and no one had any left. Still, he knew that taking out thousands of people would take a long time, and he didn't want the headache. His thoughts were interrupted by another message from the warehouse manager, Li Jin. Li Jin explained that he was now running Building 18, where only 5 elderly people had died so far. He managed to do this by collecting all the residents' resources right when the apocalypse hit and distributing them equally among everyone. He added that they were currently in desperate need of resources, and in exchange, he could provide Zhang with all the manpower he needed and help him manage relationships with the other buildings. Zhang couldn't help but smile, thinking that Li Jin's smooth talk actually fit his executive background perfectly. Zhang turned to Zhou and asked if she knew anything about Building 18. She told him the building's leader was very charismatic and that thanks to him, most of the residents there were still alive. Zhang smiled and said that charisma meant nothing in the apocalypse, only resources determined who survived until the end. He was telling her this while messaging Li Jin back to let him know he would respond to the offer later, since he found the other building leaders blowing up his phone with more friend requests. He decided not to waste his time on them, assuming their offers were all the same. He went back to ask Zhou for her advice, explaining that he had two choices: either make peace with all of them or wipe them all out. Even though he didn't want to waste his ammo and kill all those people, Zhou tried to. Our naive girl suggested they abandon the apartment and go live somewhere else if a real war broke out, but he thought to himself that her idea was way too stupid. There was no way he was going to abandon the fortress he'd built for himself and start all over again from square one. The next day we see him having Zhou cut up one of his bulletproof vests so she could make a pair of bulletproof pants out of it. After that, he sent a message in the building's group chat telling everyone that they were going to be attacked soon, because some people had seen him returning with the snowmobile and bringing back food. From then on, these people had been threatening to attack the building if he didn't hand over all the food and the snowmobile. Naturally, the building's group chat started blowing up with messages. Everyone was completely furious, but at the same time, they were anxious because there were only about 40 of them, and it would be impossible to stand their ground against the residents of all the other buildings. Zhang replied, making it clear that he only had one snowmobile, and that if they took it away, he wouldn't be able to go out and get food for them anymore, meaning they would all starve anyway. By the end of his message, he noticed that the tension in the chat had faded, and everyone was ready to defend the building even if it cost them their lives. Right then, Zhang was surprised by a group invite on his WeChat. He was confused because he had blocked all strangers, so how could someone add him to another group? WeChat, by the way, is a messaging app similar to WhatsApp or Telegram. Then he realized he had been added by Lin Ju, and the group was called Neighborhood Leaders Summit. When he joined the group, he noticed most of the building leaders were in there, including Wang from the Rabid Wolves gang, even though our hero had wiped out most of his men. After that, Li Jin took charge and laid out 3 demands for Zhang. If Zhang didn't agree, he would become an enemy to the residents of all 29 other buildings. The demands were: first, provide them with enough resources to keep them alive. Second, and most importantly, let all of them take turns using his snowmobile. Third, split all the resources he had collected up to date. When Zhang saw this, he snapped, thinking he needed to find a way to take them all out at once. But once he calmed down, he realized that was impossible because one guy couldn't kill thousands of people. Then a brilliant idea hit him. He decided to try and take out the building leaders instead, since their numbers were relatively small. Sure enough, he agreed to meet them all in person for negotiations. He decided that once they were all gathered in one place, all he'd have to do was drop a bomb on them. If he took them all out, the residents wouldn't have any leaders, and they wouldn't be able to organize themselves to attack Building 25 all at once. At the same time, over in another part of the building, we see Uncle Lao distributing food to the residents, telling them it was all thanks to Zhang. Seconds later, Zhang appeared in front of everyone. They seized the opportunity to ask him if he was really planning on negotiating and not resorting to violence. Zhang replied that if the negotiations succeeded, they would all live safely, and even the food crisis would be solved thanks to the snowmobile, and people would stop eating each other. The residents were moved and started crying at his words, but he warned them before leaving not to let their guard down and to stay sharp. Zhang took the residents with him to use as human shields just in case, and they set off to meet the other building leaders. But as they approached the meeting spot, a massive group of people suddenly confronted them. Zhang snapped, realizing they were planning to double-cross him. Because of this, he called Uncle Lao and told him to get there quickly with the rest of the Building 25 residents, since he hadn't factored in the other leaders bringing all these numbers to the negotiations. Zhang then got down on the ground, ready to provide sniper support from a distance if a fight broke out. As you can see in the picture, Zhang is the guy far in the back, with his men right in front of him. As for the other building leaders and their crew, they make up that massive crowd up front. If we check in with Uncle Lao, we see him reassuring his team and telling them to calm down. He figures that if the building leaders actually wanted to attack, they would have done it already. But the blonde-haired guy was still anxious because their numbers were huge. He pointed out to Lao that even if each of them could take out 10 enemies on their own, it still wouldn't be enough. Lao explained that the building leaders only brought those people to put pressure on Zhang and force him to accept their terms. Besides, they wouldn't gain anything from wiping out Building 25 because Zhang holds all the resources. On the other side, the leaders of the 5 buildings and their men had arrived. Lin Ju was smiling, saying that while Zhang might be terrifying on his own, once he saw this massive crowd, he'd probably lose his cool. Sure enough, Wang started laughing too, saying that Zhang's men were probably peeing their pants at the sight of their sheer numbers. Wang even joked that even though Zhang wasn't there, he was probably the first guy changing his pants out of fear. But Lin Ju stepped in, cut them off, and told them to stop running their mouths and focus on the mission. Wang immediately got annoyed and demanded to meet Zhang, since they came all the way here just to see him. Uncle Lao stepped up and told Wang that Zhang was waiting for them upstairs and that they needed to come up. He asked them why only 5 leaders showed up out of the original 29. Li Jin replied that the rest of the leaders had agreed to let the 5 of them represent all of the buildings. Lao told them that if that was the case, only the 5 of them could go up to meet Zhang, but they would have to be searched for weapons first before getting inside. Lin Ju completely refused this, and Wang warned that they would take out anyone who tried to search them. Meanwhile, Zhang was watching everything go down from a distance and was absolutely boiling with rage. Because of this, he quickly contacted Uncle Lao and told him to pull back 20 meters with the residents. Uncle Lao told the leaders to hold on for a second while he contacted Zhang. To their complete shock, Lao and the building 25 residents started backing away, and Lao gave Zhang the all-clear. Zhang was positioned right above them. Within seconds, he pulled a grenade and tossed it right toward the enemy. Because the residents of the other buildings were bunched up like idiots, the grenade landed right in the middle of a massive group of them and took out a large number. Tension and panic set in immediately as people started screaming that Zhang had explosives. But Uncle Lao stepped closer to them and let them hear Zhang's voice. Zhang warned them that he still had over 20 crates of grenades and was ready to use them right then and there. Wang immediately backed down, saying they only came to negotiate and that there was no need for all this hostility. Zhang replied, asking why they brought 1,000 people if they just wanted to talk. He added that the time was getting close to 2:30, meaning they only had 5 minutes left before the meeting was called off. Lin Ju and Li Jin stepped in quickly, begging him to wait, and asked which floor they needed to go to. Zhang told them he was waiting for them on the 13th floor and the clock was ticking. He was over the moon, noting that his strike had taken out at least 20 people. Even though he used a grenade to do it, he wasn't bothered at all since he had 20 more crates of them. Seconds later, the building leaders arrived, running up the stairs to make the deadline. Zhang asked them where the rest of the 29 building residents were. Li Jin replied that only the 5 of them represented all 29 buildings in these negotiations. Zhang felt a bit disappointed, as this meant. Realizing he couldn't just execute his original plan, Zhang understood that even if he killed these 5 leaders, the 24 other building leaders would make his life a living hell. The negotiations finally kicked off, with Li Jin explaining that they desperately needed food and drinks or else they would starve. He made it clear that they weren't targeting Zhang personally, they just wanted to survive. All they needed was for Zhang to accept the terms they had discussed in the group chat. Right then, Zhang reached into his storage and pulled out a pistol, handling it like a magic trick in a circus. The leaders completely freaked out and yelled at him to wait and ask what the heck he was doing, asking him to stay calm. Zhang simply replied that the gun had been bothering him in his pocket, so he took it out to get comfortable and told them there was nothing to worry about. Waving the pistol around, he explained that it was impossible to accept their terms since he didn't have nearly enough resources to feed thousands of people. He was also sure that these leaders had stockpiled food themselves, as it was impossible to have no food while expecting someone else to feed your people. Zhang laid down a new deal, telling them they could either take it or declare war on each other. Here is what he proposed. The deal, he would provide resources for only 10 people from each building daily, meaning he would be feeding a total of 300 people across the neighborhood. He couldn't handle anything beyond that. Lin Ju immediately tried to object, pointing out that this was too difficult because she had over 76 people to feed every day, including 20 former employees from her old company. Zhang cut her off and said that if that was the case, there was no deal between them. Then Wang chimed in, telling Lin Ju to speak only for herself and turned to Zhang. He said that the proposed resource quota was too low. Wang also stepped in, arguing that since they represented all 29 buildings, if they agreed to such a small amount, the rest of the leaders would turn them into French fries. Zhang was surprised. He pointed out that he was offering to feed 300 people, so he didn't understand how they could still complain about the amount. Li Jin asked Zhang to give them time to think about the proposal and share his other ideas. Zhang stated that nothing comes for free and that it had to be a give and take. To survive as long as possible, they needed to start working toward self-sufficiency. He explained that the supplies left in local stores wouldn't last forever. Once they ran out, everyone would starve. The first step toward self-sufficiency, Zhang said, was to plant the wheat seeds he had. Wang got annoyed and asked how they were supposed to plant anything in the snow. Zhang replied that there were plenty of people in the neighborhood who could shovel the snow away to clear a patch of land. Residents could take turns clearing the snow so the crops could grow safely. Zhang added that he would monitor the planting process closely, and as the crops grew, he would provide them with rare luxury resources like cigarettes, alcohol, clothing, and medical supplies. As soon as H-Wang and Wang heard the word cigarettes, they begged Zhang for a smoke since they were going crazy without them. Our hero pulled a pack from his pocket, telling them to help themselves and not be shy. While they were smoking, Zhang knew this was his perfect opportunity and asked if they agreed to his terms. Li Jin tried to step in and give his opinion, but Wang cut him off and told Zhang that he and H-Wang were on board, provided they got 2 packs of cigarettes a day. Zhang agreed on the spot but clarified that he would only give each of them 1 pack per day. When Li Jin saw that Zhang managed to buy them off with just a pack of cigarettes, he almost fell into a depression. Li Jin tried to argue that they couldn't make decisions this fast and had to consult the other building leaders first. But the newly crowned cigarette lovers told Li Jin that they had already agreed on behalf of all the leaders. This meant that all the building residents were forced to go along with it as well. Right then, Zhang looked out the window and noticed some strange movements. He saw the residents from the other buildings swarming toward Building 25 as if they were about to attack. Zhang snapped at the leaders and asked if they had ordered their men to attack during the negotiations. Wang replied that they were all at his mercy now, and that they would have to be complete idiots to try something like that since he would just take them out. Zhang told him that the logic held up, but that they owed him a logical explanation when they found out what triggered the attack. Li Jin quickly stepped in, pointing out that their men probably started attacking because they realized their leaders were taking too long upstairs, and they assumed something bad had happened to them. At that moment, Uncle Lao arrived with the rest of Zhang's crew. Our hero immediately ordered them to tie up all the leaders and prevent them from moving while he handled the attack outside. Without wasting any time, he lined up his sights on the head of the first guy, and the moment he was certain he wouldn't miss, he fired a bullet that blew his brains out in a brutal fashion. He then opened a barrage of gunfire on the rest of the attackers, just like he always does. This sent the remaining guys running in total panic and terror. But Zhang was annoyed and said he wasn't going to let them get away that easily. He kept shooting, picking them off like sitting ducks as they fled. Meanwhile, the captured building leaders were terrified, realizing Zhang might take them out next after finishing off their men. Within moments, Zhang was done hunting down a sufficient number of attackers and asked the leaders what they thought of his deal now. Of course, everyone agreed on the spot without a second thought, having realized they couldn't possibly mess with Zhang given his heavy firepower. Zhang told them they needed to start working from today, and that he would contact them tomorrow to pick up their first batch of supplies. Before he let them go, he warned them that he would be keeping a very close eye on them, and that if anyone tried to double-cross him, he would end them. The negotiations ended, and the building leaders headed down, completely depressed. Once they were gone, Zhang went back upstairs and reassured the residents of Building 25 about the latest developments. They started hyping him up, telling him his shooting skills were absolutely flawless. Zhang replied that it was just an average day's work for him, but told them they needed to focus now. He explained that he had agreed to supply the rest of the neighborhood with enough food for 300 people in exchange for them growing their own crops. This announcement took the residents by surprise. They started complaining that feeding 300 people was way too much and that they were going to starve to death because of it. Zhang fired back, explaining that he knew they were upset, but that if he didn't do this, he would be forced to go to war with the entire neighborhood, which consisted of thousands of people. He added that even though he had an impenetrable fortress, he only agreed to give away the food to protect the residents of Building 25. As the leader of the building, he would never let his people starve. At that point, the residents were deeply moved. They told him they appreciated the immense pressure he was under and were grateful that he was looking out for them. Once they stopped drumming and walked away, Zhang noticed Uncle Lao giving him a strange look and asked him about it. Lao admitted that he never expected Zhang to accept the negotiations so easily. Zhang clarified that this cooperation was only temporary. He had actually intended to gather all the building leaders in one spot and blow them all up, but unfortunately he had to go with Plan B when he saw that only 5 leaders had shown up. Under this new plan, he decided to give them food for only 10 people per building. He knew this would cause internal conflict and chaos inside every single building because of the severe food shortage. When that happened, the residents of each building would start taking each other out, and Zhang wouldn't even have to lift a finger. Lao was completely blown away, telling him it was a brilliant plan, and admitting that even as an ex-army officer, he wouldn't have and come up with a plan like that. Zhang replied that he wasn't a genius at all, but that he was just wielding the power of resources. Aside from that, the people in the opposing buildings were just ordinary folks with crude, basic weapons. If he got taken down by weaklings like them, how was he going to handle the genuinely dangerous people who had weapons just like his? He added that he knew there were clever people among the building leaders, and he was sure that Lin Ju and Lin Jin knew exactly what his plan was about. But of course, they had no choice but to agree to his deal after seeing his heavy firepower. This was in stark contrast to the corrupt idiots Wang and H. Wang, who jumped to accept the deal the second they saw something that benefited them personally, without giving a second thought to their own people. Lao chuckled but asked with a sense of wonder about the real reason behind making them plant wheat in this freezing weather. Zhang explained that he was killing two birds with one stone. On one hand, it would keep them exhausted from all the physical labor, leaving no energy to rebel. On the other hand, they would actually have a backup food supply in case the cold weather dragged on. Lao told him that his tactics were brilliant, and that because of this, he was ready to follow him as his leader for the rest of his life. Zhang replied that if Lao truly considered him the building's leader, he shouldn't let a single soul know about this conversation. Zhang walked away, reminding himself that he didn't just have to worry about the residents of other buildings. He still had potential backstabbers right inside his own building that he needed to look out for. When Zhang returned home, he found Zhou exercising to pass the time. She asked him how the negotiations went, but he told her to leave all that to him, assuring her that he would never let her down and that she'd live the rest of her life in comfort. The next morning, we see people from different buildings gathered together, looking cheerful and saying they hadn't seen such a peaceful gathering since the world was still normal. While they were working under the supervision of the two cigarette-loving fools, Zhang geared up to go look for resources because the pressure was on. The cigarette lovers cheered for him when they saw him, offering to tag along to help carry the supplies. Zhang told them he was taking his snowmobile and wouldn't need any help, as he could load all the supplies directly onto it. He then turned to the crowd of building residents, telling them not to slack off, as he would inspect their work personally upon his return, and no one would get their share unless the results were up to his standards. As Zhang left, Wang was completely baffled by the mystery of the snowmobile, wondering how Zhang hid the vehicle since he'd searched everywhere and found nothing. Time passed and Zhang arrived at a veterinary clinic. Inside, he found a large case filled with medical supplies, including a potent, colorless, and odorless rat poison. Zhang noted that this poison would be impossible to detect if mixed into food. Even though it was incredibly lethal, it didn't need to be used on regular residents. But as he looked at the 300 people he had agreed to feed, he decided he could use a modified approach to keep them weak by causing internal organ failure, ensuring they'd be completely dependent on him, since there was no medical treatment available for it in this condition. He noted that he would have to mix it into the food right before handing it out, as it takes about 15 minutes to take effect. After that, Zhang headed to another location near the clinic and managed to salvage 3 massive bags full of resources. When he returned with all the supplies, his followers were in total shock, asking how he managed to find so much in one trip. Zhang replied that he had to take major risks and travel far into the freezing weather specifically to keep up his end of the bargain with the building leaders. While the residents were hyping him up and acknowledging the danger he'd faced, Zhang pulled out his earpiece, contacted the other leaders, and told them to send their men to pick up the supplies. Moments later, their men arrived at the Building 25 collection point, and when they saw the piles of food, that there were only 29 people, Zhang instantly realized that the other buildings were scared of him, since each leader had only sent one of his guys. Shaking off his thoughts, he announced that he would start distributing the resources to them in order, from Building 1 to Building 30. Once the distribution was finally done, he gave a speech to the whole crowd. He told them that he knew there was tension between the different buildings, but that he would work on it as fast as possible. Even though he was forced to use weapons right now to ensure the safety of his own building's residents, he hoped that everyone could resolve their future conflicts without any violence. After his hype speech, he told everyone to head home because he wanted to get some sleep. He went up to his apartment and asked Joe to get him some food while he took a shower. Right then, he said that his ultimate goal was to take out every single resident in the neighborhood. Only when that happened would he be able to live his life without a headache. If we check in with the other buildings, we see the representative from Building 21 arriving at the leader's spot. The second Wang saw him, he rushed over, took the supplies, and pulled out his precious pack of cigarettes, which he was dying for. Since his entire crew were cigarette lovers, they wanted a piece of it, staring him down and telling him that he had to share and couldn't just keep them all for himself. Wang had to hand some over when he realized they might stage a coup and overthrow him. But he was super annoyed to find that they took almost everything, leaving him with only a single cigarette. Still, he kept his cool and started distributing the food to get through the day. To be safe, he made sure the others ate first to check for any poison. When they ate and nothing happened, he relaxed right away and thought, this is the life. He was getting food and cigarettes handed to him on a silver platter, while his crew and the rest of the people were out working in the freezing cold all day, farming. Things stayed that way for a bit, and the people were initially happy since the leaders promised they'd get food as long as they worked. But by the second day, with less food going around and some people getting nothing at all, shouting matches broke out as people fought over who would get the rations. Despite this, they kept working every day, even though they never knew when they'd get to eat. Until one day, right after Zhang finished distributing the day's share, the noise from the neighboring buildings grew louder. The conflicts escalated to the point where they were throwing each other off the buildings. The fighting continued this way, and the ones who suffered the most were the building leaders, many of whom were killed by their own residents because they were distributing the food unfairly and giving priority to themselves and their inner circles. On the morning of the third day, Zhang came down from his apartment with the residents of Building 25. He looked at the bodies of the people who had died fighting over resources and thought to himself that some had survived the fall from the buildings only to freeze to death. Seeing the blood splattered all across the buildings, he was certain that the previous day's fighting had been absolutely brutal. Right then, Lao interrupted his thoughts, asking him if he was going to make the people work again today. Zhang replied that they had to work every single day without exception. He wasn't going to go out of his way to get them food for free. He pointed at one of the dead bodies and told the crowd that this would be the fate of anyone who slacked off. Naturally, the residents ran off in terror, yelling that they would get back to work immediately. When they were gone, Lao started saying that not a single person from the other buildings came down to work today, and asked Zhang if he wanted him to notify them. Zhang replied that those people were too busy right now and were probably busy slaughtering each other. Since such a large number of the neighborhood residents had died in a single day, Zhang figured all they had to do now was wait for the survivors to wipe each other out. To put even more pressure on them, he pulled out his phone, sent a message to the leaders' group chat, and told them that if the people didn't come down to work, no one would get food, not even the cigarettes. Sure enough, the next day, Zhang saw the residents of the other buildings working again once they realized they would starve to death if they didn't. However, Zhang noticed that the number of workers was only about 2/3 of the original group, and was certain that the rest had died. Uncle Lao was baffled and asked Zhang what would make all these people work even though they knew they might not get any food at all in the end. Zhang replied that they were working during the day to get a fraction of resources, and at night they were killing each other so their numbers would drop enough for everyone to get fed. Aside from that, they were forced to work because it was their last lifeline. Right as he was about to leave, he was surprised to hear Linju calling out to him, saying she wanted to start new negotiations and discuss things right away. Zhang looked at her confused and asked, "What do you want, lady?" She began by saying that if the situation kept going like this, most of the neighborhood's residents would die. Therefore, if he agreed to supply them with just a little more resources, she was willing to help him bring all the neighborhood residents under his control. She added that she would help him expand and build his own kingdom in the apocalypse. Of course, Zhang saw right through her game. He knew her playbook by heart, so he grabbed her by the shoulder and said, "Stop right there, please. I know all the tricks and games people like you use to manipulate people's minds." He added that he was sure she had used this exact method on plenty of people before him, and that they had all ended up dead. He said that if he agreed to her offer, he'd be a fool because he would end up just like them. Zhang pushed her to the ground and told her he didn't give a single cent whether they lived or went to hell. As he walked away, Lin Ju tried to call out to him and tell him to wait, but he didn't give her the time of day. He headed over to Li Jin and his crew, who were working hard. That was when a huge shock hit him. He couldn't believe his eyes when he realized that all the residents in Li Jin's building were still alive. Li Jin noticed Zhang standing nearby and asked him the reason for his visit. Zhang replied with a question, wanting to know how all his men were still alive, even though the residents of the other buildings were slaughtering each other every day. Li Jin answered that he had laid down the results of the negotiations to everyone from the very beginning. Since then, they had been distributing the meager 6-person ration among everyone equally. Zhang let out a laugh and told him that his strategy wouldn't work in the long run. The time would come when people would turn on him from extreme hunger. When Zhang started to leave just as expected, Li Jin called out and asked him to help his followers. Zhang flatly refused, adding that he had expected him to be a bit smarter in managing his building. Li Jin began to blame himself, admitting that he knew Zhang was right, but that he just couldn't abandon his humanity and let the people relying on him die. When Zhang walked away, he ran right into the cigarette lovers, who asked him whether he had collected the day's resources yet. Zhang told them he was just about to head out and would bring them the cigarettes they loved. Naturally, they were over the moon and told Zhang that from this day forward they were his servants, and if he needed anything in the future, all he had to do was give the word and they wouldn't hesitate. Zhang told them that their words and thanks meant absolutely nothing to him, as he considered them like his own brothers. Zhang went and collected the day's resources and returned to distribute them to everyone. Right then, he noticed that some of the other building leaders had found out about the cigarette situation. They were whining and complaining, saying it was unfair to favor one group over another. Zhang put on his nice guy persona and promised to sort everything out starting the next day. But this move made Zhang's right-hand man and his crew really mad, as they felt those people were just taking advantage of Zhang's kindness. Zhang reassured them not to worry about it, telling them that dealing with the cigarettes was no big deal. But as he walked away, they were completely furious and started saying that Zhang was treating those outsiders better than he was treating them. If we check in with our hero, we see him thinking to himself that he couldn't keep going like this. He knew full well that more than half the neighborhood residents were dead, and that the ones still alive definitely wouldn't need to kill each other anymore since they had enough resources to last. Because of this, he decided to execute his plan and put the poison in the food, because he was sick of being obligated to feed 300 people every day. The next day, we see him gathering a massive amount of resources and putting on a gas mask so he wouldn't accidentally inhale the rat poison. On top of that, he collected some rare supplies and made sure to bring alcohol for everyone so they could enjoy themselves before they died. When he finished spiking the food with poison, he felt a bit uneasy because the process had been way too easy. He started getting paranoid, wondering if the leaders had come up with a plan together and were planning to double-cross him. These thoughts started giving him severe anxiety, but he managed to shake it off by reassuring himself that no one could hurt him as long as he had his fortress and his weapons. When he returned and got ready to distribute the food, he met up with Uncle Lao and the rest of his crew, who were guarding him while he handed out the supplies. Seconds later, the residents of the other buildings came down. Zhang put on his nice guy persona and welcomed them, knowing full well that today would be the last day he'd ever see them like this, so he didn't mind being nice to them one last time. But when it was the turn of Building 21, Wang's building, we see one of his men standing right behind our hero with a look of pure hatred and malice. Without any warning, the guy pulled a gun from his pocket and fired a hail of bullets directly at Zhang. Right then, Uncle Lao jumped in front of him and used his own body to shield Zhang from the barrage. Lao collapsed right into our hero's arms. Zhang was in a state of panic, not knowing what to do. Then Zhang's right-hand man and his crew decided to betray him and tried to take him out. But what they didn't know was that Zhang had already completely lost his cool. He pulled out his machine gun and said that starting today, he wouldn't be giving anyone a second chance. Within seconds, he opened fire on the whole crowd with pinpoint accuracy, without stopping. We see them dropping dead one after the other. Everyone else started running in total panic, yelling that they hadn't expected him to have a machine gun on top of everything else. But Zhang didn't stop shooting, gunning down everyone he could reach. Even when his machine gun ran out of ammo, he pulled out 2 pistols and said that today he was going to avenge Uncle Lao and wipe them all out. When the cigarette lovers saw that his weapons never ran out, they tried to beg him to spare them, but Zhang was in a state of blind rage and took them out without a second thought. He then turned to Lin Ju, who tried to explain that she had nothing to do with it. While she was begging for her life so she could go back to the daughter waiting for her at home, Zhang cut her off with a bullet right between the eyes. He said that he wasn't foolish enough to let her escape and promised himself that from now on, he wouldn't give anyone a second chance. Seconds later, he began his journey back to his building, his heart heavy with grief. But right then, a joyful surprise awaited him as he heard the voice of Zhang. Ran over to him as fast as he could and tried to talk and communicate with him, but there was no response. He quickly pulled out his phone and contacted Zhou to help him with first aid. She told him to use a specific injection as soon as possible until she could get there. Once Zhang did that, he called on 2 residents from his building who had been hiding and had them carry Uncle Lao. He ordered them to take him to his apartment as fast as possible. On their way there, the treacherous Chi saw him. She was worried and started squeezing out some crocodile tears, asking Zhang about her husband's health. Our hero reassured her, promising that he and Zhou would do everything they could to save him. Chi used this moment to play the victim, telling Zhang she would end her own life if Lao died, but she wanted him to take her daughter in and raise her. Zhang was caught off guard and told her not to jinx it, reminding her that Lao was still alive. She kept up the crying act and said she would love Lao for the rest of his life. When they got to Zhang's apartment, Zhang told her to go to her own place so she wouldn't get in the way of Lao's treatment. But she wouldn't let go, insisting that Lao would need someone to look after him, and that she was the closest person to him and the best one for the job. Since Zhang wanted Uncle Lao to be comfortable and recover quickly, he finally let the treacherous Chi and her daughter into his apartment, even though he was a bit hesitant. As soon as she stepped inside, she started crying, saying she hadn't been in a warm place like this in months. She started getting carried away, forgetting about Lao, and went straight into the kitchen without warning, helping herself to Zhang's warm water. When the crybaby finished drinking, she turned to Zhang and asked if he had any powdered milk for her baby girl. That was when Zhang reached his breaking point and told her to push her luck if she dared. She replied that she wasn't being pushy, just shameless, and that she only wanted powdered milk for the baby because Lao would be happy about it. Zhang snapped, warning her that if she said one more word, he would throw her out, and made it clear that she was only there to take care of Lao and nothing else. Zhang quickly pulled a medical bed out of his storage dimension for Lao. Chi saw him do this and asked him how he pulled off that magic trick. Zhang ignored her and told Zhou to ask for whatever medical supplies she needed, and he would provide them. A few seconds later, Zhou finally examined Uncle Lao's wounds and told the anxious Zhang that his condition was pretty critical, but that she could treat him as long as the bullets hadn't hit any internal organs. While Zhang was completely stressed out, Chi started crying, saying, "What are we going to do without you, Lao, my master?" This made Zhang lose his temper and warn her that if she made Lao's condition worse with her whining, he would throw both her and her daughter off the balcony for getting on his nerves. She used the opportunity to say she would go wait outside so she wouldn't bother them. In reality, she was thinking to herself that she needed to hurry up and enjoy the food and hot water before Lao died and Zhang kicked her out. Zhang told her that if he caught her leaving Lao's room without his permission, he'd turn her into French fries and told her to keep quiet. To avoid getting any more annoyed, he told her he was heading out now, but would get the full report from Joe when he got back. When he went downstairs, he met the rest of the building's residents. They started apologizing to him, pledging their loyalty and swearing they had no idea about the betrayal that had just taken place. Zhang replied that the building leader's treachery had resulted in Uncle Lao getting hurt. Because of this, if they wanted to prove their loyalty, they would have to help him get his revenge by joining him in a counterattack. Across all the buildings that took part in the betrayal, naturally, the residents started getting worried, asking how they were supposed to pull that off with their small numbers, and began wondering if our badass Zhang still had a few tricks up his sleeve that he hadn't used yet. Right then, Zhang stepped in and told them he had enough fuel to burn the buildings down, and that he wouldn't need anything from them except to take out anyone who managed to escape. Since the only exit for these people would be jumping from the balconies, all the residents of Building 25 had to do was stand below and finish off anyone who jumped. Within moments, they arrived in front of Building 21, the first target, and Zhang ordered his crew to surround it from all sides. When the residents of that building saw our hero, they were terrified. Ever since they found out about his heavy firepower, they had been completely terrified of him. But the remaining members of Wang's gang insisted they weren't scared at all, claiming they could just take Zhang out while he was walking up the stairs. If we check back in with Zhang, we see him heading toward one of the windows on the ground floor of the building and climbing inside. When he didn't find anyone on that floor, he relaxed and said he could get right to work without any distractions. He quickly pulled out some wood and gasoline to build a fire big enough to engulf the entire building. While he was setting Building 21 on fire, one of the residents was trembling in fear, having no idea what Zhang was doing down below. Our hero had laid out a long trail of gasoline so he could light it and escape without getting hurt. He tossed his lighter onto the gas, muttering that he was just trying to warm up the residents since it was freezing outside. When he stepped out of the building, everyone noticed the fire catching on quickly. Zhang told them to get ready because people would start jumping out any second. As expected, the flames grew intense, and the residents started throwing themselves from the upper floors when they realized there was no other escape from the fire. Zhang's followers were completely shocked by this brutal method of execution. Meanwhile, the rest of the residents threw themselves from the balconies just like the others. That's when Zhang's men stepped in, without hesitating for a single second, and took out anyone who survived the fall. If we look back at Zhang, we see him standing back and admiring the fire, calling it a work of art. Meanwhile, the residents of Building 26 were watching Building 21 burn. One of them said that their turn would definitely come soon because of their leader's betrayal. His friend replied that they had nothing to do with the betrayal, and that all the trouble was caused by the building leaders alone. But their conversation was cut short by Zhang's voice calling out, "Let's move to the next building, boys." The residents panicked and tried to explain that the attack was the cigarette lover's fault, and that if Zhang took them out, he'd be killing innocent people.